Hello, hello. Happy Thursday and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jessica Rice. I am the founder of Jessica Rice Coaching. And I just felt like it was on my heart today to share a little bit of maybe some hope and some conviction around our work that we do. So I know that there is just so much that, especially the East Coast right now, is facing in terms of the aftermath of Hurricane Helene. Now we have Hurricane Milton. And sometimes it can just feel like no matter what we do, we just can't seem to win. And I don't know if you've ever felt like this in your life, but I wanted to share a little bit about that because I think sometimes when we're looking at these different types of events and catastrophes that are happening, it can start to feel incredibly overwhelming and like there's just no hope. And so we just walk through wondering, what is it that we're even working so hard for sometimes? What are we fighting for so much? And I've had this amazing blessing of having amazing coaches and people in my life who have continually lifted me up. Kelly Roach is my coach, Kate Jaramillo, my coach, all these people who just constantly are pouring back into me. And I know right now that their whole team is over in Florida right now, weathering the storm. They're not in the eye of the storm. But it crossed my heart because sometimes it can feel like we have a storm in our own lives. We have a storm that we are contending with, personally, and then we're expected to show up in our life, in our career, in our leadership, as though everything is just going fine and dandy. And yet under the surface, we are just dealing with so much. And I think especially as leaders, sometimes this can be incredibly debilitating, number one. And it can also, we can struggle then, how do we show up authentically? How do we have the motivation ourselves to then yet inspire our teams to be innovative and cutting edge and, compete with the different market competitors that we have? And I wanted to talk about this because I think it's incredibly important. Sometimes we can sit there and we can say, okay, if I do these things and if I have these skills and I have these certifications and I have these extra letters behind my name, then I will prove my worth. But it never addresses the fact that regardless of all of those things, we are still human. We still have human qualities. We still have things that we have to overcome. And I wanted to ask, what is the sea? What is that turbulent storm that is going on sometimes for you under the surface that you are continually having to grapple with in your life or in your leadership? Perhaps it's conflict with other colleagues in your work. Maybe it's dealing with different types of employees, some who are very challenging. They might be inspired, they might be passionate, but sometimes it's hard to manage. There's so many little things. What about parents? Sometimes parents right now we're trying to deal with, how do we be there for our kids and show up for our jobs? I know that that's always been a struggle for me because I want to do a good job in everything that I'm doing. And I want to please everybody around me. And I can't do it all. And sometimes when that starts to happen, what we end up doing is just ignoring the big elephant in the room, the bigger issues. We start putting ourselves last. We start putting our personal development last. We start putting all the things that we should be addressing last because it's just too much. It's too overwhelming. There's no time to prioritize personal development and leadership development and growth and emotional intelligence and conflict and negotiation and all of the different things that we're, supposed to be learning and supposed to already even know maybe. Maybe there's a perceived judgment that we're even carrying around about ourselves, and it just feels impossible. And so I wanted to provide some encouragement and some hope for you today, because sometimes we can mount all of these things up in our mind, and it feels insurmountable. The issues that we're feeling feel like a Category 5 hurricane. But what is it that we can do then to turn it back, to dial it back into a more manageable storm? Because more often than not in our leadership, it isn't necessarily the storm that we think that we're facing. Sometimes it is something completely different. Sometimes it is a lower level of light rain, perhaps. Or we could be focusing on the wrong things. We could be focusing on maybe this issue over here and completely ignoring this larger mountain on the other side. So I want to ask you today, what is it in your life that you have been ignoring or putting off or forgetting? Because sometimes we intentionally forget things. I know that seems like a contradiction in terms. Forgetting is something that isn't done intentionally, but sometimes we do. And so if we can be really honest with ourselves and ask ourselves these questions, then we can start to just breathe into the things that we're facing. Then we can start to analyze and look at with a new clarity the areas of our lives that may not be going very well. Because as leaders, it's so important that we can do this. Top leaders who are able to continue to adapt with the challenges of the future, continue to stay competitive in this market, continue to be innovative and inspiring, also are really good at looking at the issues, the things that are happening for them under the surface, the things, the gaps, the areas that need to be addressed, the weaknesses. So we can't only just look at the positive or our strengths. As much as those things feel good, in order for us to become disruptors or to be disruptors in our market, we have to first challenge ourselves, and we have to be willing to disrupt our own mindset, the pathways that it naturally tries to go down, all those assumptions and beliefs that we carry around with us. And sometimes as we're trying to prove ourselves in so many different areas, we're exhausting ourselves because we don't really feel truly worthy. Maybe we don't feel worthy of the role that we carry. Maybe we don't feel worthy of our team. Maybe it's just ourselves that we don't feel worthy of. And why would I bring any of this up? Because as leaders, there is nothing more that shines a flashlight into our lives, into who we are, than when we step up into leadership and we're stepping up into this plate where people are looking to us and they're judging us based on how we respond. It's hugely challenging. It's largely challenging because we didn't have to do that necessarily before, but we've put ourselves into a position where now we have to look at everything. So what is it that's going on under the surface, and what is it that potentially you've been putting off? Sometimes I put off things because I think, oh, I'll get to this later. Oh, this is too much of a challenge. Oh, later. I don't have time for this right now. I don't feel like it right now. And yet sometimes those tasks are actually relatively small, but the meaning behind them is much larger, the root issue. So this morning, I was really working on getting the rest of my wall. I've had people ask me, does the whole room look like this? No, my whole room doesn't look like this. This is a portion of my room that has some padded walls, which makes it seem like an insane asylum, but it's really because I have a podcast and it's to help with the audio quality of the room. The rest of the room would be covered 1970s wood paneling that I've not figured out what to do with, but this was a solution. Now, what happened was I started to put this together and get it mostly complete. And then I stopped And I told myself for quite some time, I didn't have time to finish it. I'll get to it later. It's good enough. It's, done enough. And then this morning, it just bothered me. It bothered me that there were certain angles with my camera that you could still see half of the wood paneling. I can still see parts of it, in the corner there. And I don't know, maybe I'll do something with it. But the real issue under the surface for me was that it brought up a very painful memory that I had really been avoiding. And sometimes that's true for lots of areas of our lives, whether it's our leadership or things that we're dealing with in our families, or just, going and doing fixing something that's broken, because we feel like it's something wrong with us. And so therefore we own it to such a great extent, but to face it is painful, and to face it hurts. And so when I first started putting up this little podcast studio of mine, I had been putting the paneling onto the walls. My son was helping me. The rest of the room is our homeschool room. For those of you who follow me know that I homeschool my son as well. And what had happened that day was I was told that my dog, I was putting all of this stuff, and then, was told that my dog wasn't doing very well. It was behaving oddly. And at first I didn't really want to believe it. I just thought, oh, what do you mean? What do you mean my dog's not behaving? And so I stopped with the paneling. I went upstairs, and sure enough, our dog, our German Shepherd, we'd had for 10 years, was the same age as my son. I was 6 months pregnant when we brought him home, very much a part of our lives. He had had a tumor and it burst. And I didn't even believe it then. And he was such a good boy. I was like, come on, let's go outside. And he followed me, and then he collapsed. And that's when I knew. And I had to pick him up, and I had to put him into the back of my SUV and take him to the emergency vet. And we had a really hard decision that we had to make that day. And I had been carrying that, and it's been just slightly over a year. It happened in June of the previous year. I've been carrying that. I've been thinking about that every time that I looked at the remaining little octagons to put up onto the wall. I just continued to think about that. I thought about, what if I had done something different? What if I had actually listened or paid attention? What if I hadn't asked him to call me or to come with me, and I hadn't called him to me? Would things have changed? And I owned this, and that became a part of finishing this wall, which in some ways have nothing to do with one or the other, but it just happened to be circumstantial that these things, were together. And I was thinking about that. So today I just put it up. I was like, I'm going to finish parts of it, and it's still undone, and it's still kind of messy, and it's still coming together. And it is what it is to a certain extent. It's my solution for now. But I also wanted to face that fear of feeling what I felt, the devastation that I had felt, the blame and the ownership that I felt. There's other pieces sometimes, what did it take me? Maybe 5-10 minutes, really? Honestly, it was like you peel off the sticker and you stick it on. It was really that fast. But what is it that we avoid sometimes? Because we feel like we're owning something, and we've attached it to something so painful that we just ignore it. And that shows up in so many different and interesting ways. Here's a really benign example, but it can show up then in our leadership. Maybe there's conflict. Maybe we're dealing with past trauma that then shows up, in our workplace. We're reminded of something, and so then we don't deal with the thing, and it just starts getting bigger and bigger. But what is it that we're dealing with sometimes that we're postponing or putting off that we would really do much better with if we faced? And there's so many little examples of things like that in our lives. I work with leaders all the time. We're working with priorities, shifting priorities, competing priorities, time blocking, issues with time management. How many meetings do all of us have that we're trying to fit in all of the different things that are necessary, and struggling to find the necessary time to do then the rest of the work that we need to be doing? But also, in that same vein, Are there areas that we're procrastinating? Are there areas that we're ignoring and not wanting to look at that might be a 3-minute or a 5-minute introspection? Maybe it's a 3-minute conversation with this one individual to just clarify your meaning or the words that you said, and just owning maybe you screwed up. We all do. There's been times in my leadership where I definitely screwed up. I said the wrong thing. I had the wrong tone. I was in a bad mood. And if we can address it, the sooner we address it, the sooner then we can move on and deal with it. But it's when it festers under the surface and we create the storm in our lives. Some of you know about my son, and he was learning to ride his BMX, and actually today his gear is coming in, so he's very, very excited. And then we had just gotten him an all-purpose kind of BMX bike, and I was very proud of it. I put it together myself. My husband had been coming home from work. I was like, I'm going to do it myself. I've never put a bike together, but I'm going to do it. And so then on Sunday, one of the pedals, he was riding it, and one of the pedals came off, and he fell. He was okay. And my husband looked at it and he was like, oh, something on there is wrong. Whoever put this on, which is me, stripped the coils. And so I was thinking about it and I was thinking about it. And so I just decided, I'm going to go out there. I'm just going to take a look at it. So I grabbed an Allen wrench, went out there. And I realized that, when you put on the pedal, we want to put it on screwing it right, but really you have to face from the other side of the bike, and then turning it right is the correct way. But if you're facing the pedal, it's like you have to turn it left because it doesn't make any sense. So I did that, and sure enough, it started to come on, and then I had to use a lot of force to get it back on, but we did. And so my son was like, great, you fixed my bike. And I was very happy to do so because we had just gotten it. I didn't want to have to deal with one more thing. But isn't that the thing? Like, sometimes we can put off just that little thing. And if we just stop and think about it for long enough, the solution will come to us and we know what it is that we have to do. And maybe it's not even as big of a deal that we think it is, because I was being told like, well, you're probably going to take it down to the bike shop. They're going to have to rethread it and all this other stuff. And I was like, ugh, how much is that going to cost? I don't really know. But instead, I laid in bed and I thought about it, and I had some distance between it, and I thought, and I remembered back, like, oh, this was the challenge I faced, and for whatever reason, it became loose. So we got it back in. And it's done. And so the reason I'm telling you that is because sometimes there are these little things in our careers, in our lives, in our workplace that we can just simply address. But also, if we take enough time to really think about it and not be overreactionary, not get overly emotional, then the answer can come to us. And so not allowing things to become bigger than they really are under the surface. I was a little bit annoyed when my husband told me, like, oh, well, I think whoever put it on, I was kind of like, it was me. Obviously, you know that. But I had to put some distance, and I walked away, and I thought about it for a couple of days. And then I was like, you know what? I just walked outside. I'm like, we're going to do this. And we did, and it took me 5 minutes. All this to say, what is it sometimes in our lives that we're putting off that we really could take 5 minutes and address, that would then free up more time for then us to address even some of those bigger issues, some of those bigger goals or things that we're looking to accomplish in our lives, because there isn't anything that we couldn't do when we put our mind to it. There isn't anything that we couldn't do in our leadership and how we lead and how we inspire and how we motivate. If we just make it a goal and we set that determination and we decide, this is how we're going to show up. This is how we're going to lead. This is how we're going to be present for our teams and our people and our organizations. And we just become the person that we need to be. But when we leave things unaddressed internally, they become bigger than they really need to be sometimes because we're avoiding it. That is where the neuroscience comes in, and our mind is going through these different loops, and we're struggling as a leader because we're thinking about all these different various scenarios, and we're not challenging our assumptions, number one, and we're also not addressing them. And so then we have a bigger problem. And so when we look at our personal development or our personal leadership journey or growth, we start thinking, oh, this is going to be too much work. This is going to be too hard. This is da 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 da. And literally, it can take 5 minutes every single day to just set that intention, set that focus, show up a little bit differently. It is like tweaking, the gears on a bike, making those little adjustments so that you can then race faster, so that you can then be faster, so that you can do things more efficiently. That's what we're here to help guide our teams in doing, but we have to be able to do it for ourselves. And so this was coming up for me strongly today, and I wasn't really sure how to put it all into words. So hopefully it made sense. But sometimes it's really a matter of just deciding. And in that process of doing, facing the fear, that's what our brain needs in order for us to actually move on. We can think about it, but we're not moving on. Action is what helps us to move beyond those points. And so when we decide and we just start taking little action, small, little steps every day, it adds up. So what are you willing to face that's under the surface that you can then heal from so that you can grow? Because leadership is a journey. It's a journey of self-discovery. We do have that spotlight that's being put onto us. We are not going to show up perfectly every day. But if we're willing to look internally, then we can externally be the leaders that we are intended to be, that we need to be, that our teams are looking for. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'd love to hear in your comments what your thoughts are. And if this is something that you would like to explore more deeply, I'm doing a workshop on October 22nd at noon Pacific time. And we're going to be diving in deeper on the different leadership development tracks, vertical leadership. And if you're not familiar with what that is, I invite you to come and hear more so that you can start to look introspectively on what types of things that you want to focus on as a leader, how we start to create those goals so that in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, you have made significant progress in the areas that you're looking to grow without it becoming a mountain that you're trying to climb. So I invite you, I'll put the link into the comments as well. And I'd love to have you join me. All right, enjoy the rest of your day, your week. For those of you who are being impacted, I am praying for you, and I hope that you can